LinkedIn News.
And the Enneagram, sometimes we talk about it in terms of a false self and a true self. That the personality is sort of more of a false self that you developed, or a persona to make your way in the world, but that by adulthood, it becomes limiting. And I think the Enneagram says actually by seeing more what you've identified with and how that's not all of who you are, it creates a pathway to knowing more of who you are. It allows you to fulfill more of your potential.
That's Enneagram expert Bea Chestnut. I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better. Stay tuned to learn everything you want to know about the Enneagram personality test and how you can use it for your own personal and professional growth. Make sure you hit that follow button to get new episodes of our show every week. And if you're a regular listener, thank you. And I have a favor to ask. Would you leave us a review so we can keep bringing you more of the kinds of conversations you love? Thank you so much for your support. Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better, a personal development podcast where every week I sit down with some of the world's brightest minds and bravest hearts who use science and story to share strategies for how we can flourish individually, in relationship to others, and to the world around us. So this week's episode and next week's are about something called the Enneagram. And I want to tell you a little bit more about why I'm so passionate about it and what I hope you get out of these conversations. So first, what is it? The Enneagram is a personality typing system that categorizes each of us into one of 9 different types. If you've ever taken something like the Myers-Briggs, it's kind of like that, but I believe it is much more powerful. Why? Because it focuses not just on your behaviors, like are you extroverted or introverted, are you analytical or action-oriented, but your motivations, why you do what you do. And it explores our personality to show us that we have a personality. We are not our personalities. Meaning it shows us the box our personality puts us in and how to grow beyond that. Because we all know we have some blind spots and ways in which we were a little less fearful, worried, brave, or thoughtful. After taking the test, I was blown away by its accuracy in typing me, and it gave me clear language I could use to both understand myself and to share with others when I was relating to them, which is so important. It was like a personal user guide. But the Enneagram also gave me something beyond just personality type results. It gave me a practical path to growth. I felt I could learn, but I could also be accountable and take action. So first and foremost, what I hope you get out of this conversation is a fresh perspective on your personality and how to grow. The second, less immediately obvious benefit for me with the Enneagram was that it transformed how I looked at everyone in my life. My empathy and reverence for others, whether they be coworkers, family, or friends of other Enneagram types, grew by multitudes. And I loved it so much I got certified, so I started working with people and teams using it. But you don't even have to go that deep to get something great out of this tool. If you're wondering just how to show up better for yourself in your relationships, at work, part 1 of this 2-parter will show you how to use this tool, and it can give you a really clear path to do that. And if you have what seems like an unresolvable conflict with someone, or you just can't jive on a project with coworkers, or you want to be better at delegating tasks to the right people, part 2 will be huge for you. I suggest staying tuned for both because they kind of build on each other. Now, of course, you are so much more than your Enneagram number. You and I have social identifiers, experiences, and people who've molded who we are. So don't make this thing gospel, but be open to what you can learn and stick it in your toolbox. Okay, I'm handing you over to 2 of the top Enneagram teachers in the world, Bea Chestnut and Aranio Pais, to tell you all about the types. Here they are.
The Enneagram is based on a model of human experience that says we have 3 centers of intelligence, or ways of processing information from the outside world. Our head, that kind of thinks and analyzes and plans. Our heart, that's more based on our emotions. And our body is also a center of intelligence, a kind of gut knowing or instinctual intelligence. I think it's a uniquely powerful tool for self-development because it provides personality type descriptions that are incredibly accurate and very deep and thorough and detailed. So when you find your type, it gives you a lot of information about both what you can readily observe in yourself, but also blind spots and unconscious tendencies. I worked as a therapist for a long time. And, when someone comes into therapy or when someone starts a self-development process, there's a question of where do you start? How do you know how to focus your efforts? And I think the Enneagram just really creates a kind of map that provides an enormous way of accelerating inner development.
To me, if I may add to this, Leah, when 25 years ago I got to know the Enneagram, what amazed me is that it wasn't really another typology, another self-knowledge system. It was, and it still is for me after 25 years studying it pretty hard, an amazing way to overcome my own limitations. So it's a process of self-development rather than a way of stereotyping people and labeling them. And also when it comes to development, it's very complete because we're talking about professional development, personal development, but also psychological development and even spiritual development. So it's very comprehensive.
So there are 3 types that are what we would call head-based types, 3 types that are more heart-based, based in the emotional center, and 3 types that are body-based. We like to start with the body-based types, 8, 9, and 1. So I'll start by describing type 8. So the focus of attention for 8s is on power and control and deploying strength in the world, because 8s tend to see the world in terms of people being divided into the strong and the weak. And of course, if you see the world that way, who will you identify with? You'll naturally probably want to identify with the strong. And 8s tend to have a big energy, a big presence. They are very good at tackling big challenges. They have easier access to anger than most types, and they're better than most types at engaging in conflict. And so they tend to be very direct and assertive. They see the big picture very easily, but they tend to not see their vulnerability. So their blind spots are a lot around not being in touch with what they might feel as weakness or any vulnerable or softer emotions. And of course, the personality focus on being strong is an overcompensation in being strong as a way of denying weakness. So that's kind of the fundamental tension at the core of the 8 personality. Do you want to talk about 9, Urani?
So 9's focus of attention is on external demands of different kinds. So 9's are really good in perceiving what others need and what the environment needs, and they are always available, easily taking other people's opinions and consider all sides of a matter. And at the same time, they find it really hard to place attention in their own needs and demands and what they need. Their attention is not inside, so they self-forget quite a bit. And they find it really hard to self-promote or to show the good things in them. Sometimes other people look at 9's and see it's great, they're modest, but it's actually shown in the Enneagram as self-forgetting, and something that 9's need to learn how to bring attention back to themselves and to feel being more worthy and have more value in self. What about 1's, Bea?
So the 1 is the 3rd body-based type, and 1s are sometimes called the perfectionist or the reformer, and they focus their attention on right and wrong, good and bad. They automatically see how everything they put their attention on can be improved or made better. So it's like they see something and they automatically see how whatever that is differs from an ideal of perfection of how that thing could be. Now, they tend to be very, very self-critical. All of us are self-critical, but 1s are more self-critical than average. And they can also be critical of other people because, again, they have this kind of a judging mind that's always saying, okay, what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad. And they try to be good and try to avoid being bad or making a mistake mistakes or anything like that. Their strengths, though, are that they tend to be very detail-oriented, very hardworking, reliable, ethical. But one of the things I like about the Enneagram is it shows us how when we overdo our strengths, they become liabilities. So the challenges for ones is that they can be overly responsible. They can be too critical. They can be too self-controlling. When they're trying to do everything right, they put a lid on their own feelings and impulses. And so sometimes they get out of touch with the natural flow that they might be more in tune with if they weren't kind of trying to control themselves so much to do things right and be perfect.
Okay, so those are the 3 body types. 8s, also known as active controllers, 9s, known as adaptive peacemakers, and 1s, known as strict perfectionists or reformers. Next up, we have the 3 heart types, 2s, 3s, and 4s.
Type 2, the first of the 3 heart types, that's my type. So 2s focus a lot on other people, on how other people are feeling, and especially what we can do to create connection or rapport with other people. I think in the Enneagram world, there are some misconceptions about 2s, and the 2 is often called the helper or the giver. But I think that title leads people to have an overly simplistic view of 2s as kind of just the sort of caretaker type, which, is partly true. But for me, it's really about being liked. It's not necessarily about helping. That's not the main point. Now, helping people, supporting others can be a vehicle for being liked, but it's the achievement of a positive connection. It's to make other people have positive feelings about me. That's kind of the main goal. Because when everyone likes me, when people are thinking good things about me, I sort of feel like I can relax. Now, similar to 9s, 2s aren't so in tune with their insides. So when I first started doing Enneagram work a long time ago, I was in a women's group, and I remember one day the leader of the group turned to me and said, "So what do you need from the group today, Bea?" And I thought about that question, and I had no idea how to answer that question. None. Seemed like a simple question, but it was as if I looked inside to see what I needed, and there was like a void. It was like this existential anxiety of like, wow, I have no idea what I need. Now, after many years of therapy, now I know very clearly what I'm feeling, and I am an emotional person, but 2s tend to part of the time put a lid on their feelings, and part of the time the lid comes off and we can be very emotional. But the strengths of the 2 are having a genuine interest in people. I was a therapist for many years, and people would say to me, like, "Don't you get tired of hearing people talk about their problems all day?" And I would say, actually, no. I love hearing people talk about themselves. It's an honor, and I'm endlessly interested in people. So that's a good thing. But on the downside, it's hard for us to say no and make boundaries. It's hard to be direct sometimes. 2s can be very indirect because it can be hard to be in touch with the fact that helping others can be actually a form of control. So the sort of blind spots for 2s, one of the blind spots is their own needs, but the other one is how supporting others can sometimes be a manipulation. There's a kind of giving to get. Like, if I'm really nice to you, maybe you'll be really nice to me. If I meet your needs, maybe when I need something, you'll meet my need, hopefully without me having to ask, because 2s are not very good at asking for help.
Right. So type 3, for 3s who are also emotional types on the Enneagram, but sometimes don't look like, the focus of attention goes to achieving success. Also goals of all kinds, accomplishments, of course, and paying attention to their image. So 3s are really hard workers, and many times they find it really, really hard to stop. Stopping feels almost like dying. And that's because 3s have come to identify with doing as an identity for them. They come from a mindset of, I make things happen in the world, and if I don't do anything, nothing will happen and the world will collapse. So the risk is to become a little bit like a human doing, not a human being. And being is, what is that? What is being? What is feeling? And actually the paradox is 3s are feeling types. Feelings come to the threes all the time, but they think that feelings will be damaging to their performance and they push them away. So here's an emotional type who tries to not be an emotional type. And threes shapeshift, a little bit like twos do, to be admired and recognized in a prototype of what people expect from them. But by shapeshifting, they lose touch with who they really are. And because they shapeshift very unconsciously, automatically, and without noticing, then they lose touch with whatever is more stable in them, whatever is more true in them. It's like an actor identifying with a character. And the challenges for threes have to do with asking yourself questions like, what do I really like? What do I really want? Because threes may very well just go ahead with what will lead them to be more successful. But sometimes going for success doesn't equal being joyful and liking what you're doing.
America is a three culture. And it's interesting because sometimes this is sort of seen as normal, a normal way to be instead of a particular personality style. And in a way, it makes it easier in some ways for threes to be successful because their operating system is so much aligned with what the culture values, working really hard, achieving things, making money and having titles and looking good and not being too emotional. But on the other hand, it actually makes it really hard for threes when they seek to grow because it's hard to give up. So type 4 is the third of the three heart types. And if there's an underlying tension in all of us, especially growing up as children, between attachment and authenticity, in other words, who we decide to be in order that other people will approve of us or that our parents will be happy with us versus being who we really are, fours kind of go more toward authenticity. So fours' focus of attention is on their internal experience. So kind of the opposite for twos. Fours focus more inside than they do on the outside. We call that self-referencing. So fours tend to be very in tune with how they're feeling and what they're thinking. In fact, they can over-identify with their emotions. They, just like a three thinks, I am what I do, the four can think, I am what I feel. Fours tend to also compare themselves to others a lot and often see themselves as less than or more than, but probably a little more often less than. And they can tend to have a kind of sense of inadequacy, like I'm not good enough because of that comparing mind. They can be a kind of sense of other people have something I'm lacking. And so there's also often a focus on what's missing, and it can be in themselves or in a situation. Interestingly, fours are also truth tellers. They're very emotionally intuitive. This is one of their big strengths. So on a team, for instance, they can be really helpful by saying, here's what I think we're not talking about, or here's a little bit of the shadow that no one really wants to see. And they tend to be a little even nonconformist and individualistic in terms of, hey, this is what I authentically think and feel, and I'm not going to hold that back. I'm going to say it. Whereas twos and threes sometimes unconsciously hold things back if they think people won't like it. Fours will be like, well, this is it. This is what's authentic. This is how I authentically feel. And if you don't like it, you don't like it, and they shape shift much less.
All right, those are your three heart types. Twos are also known as the helpers. Threes are the competitive achievers, and fours are the intense creatives. Last but not least, Bea and Aranya are going to walk us through the three head types, fives, sixes, and sevens.
So moving on to fives and the head types. I am five, so I can speak a little bit from my own experience. As a five, I focus a lot of my attention on learning, grabbing information, knowledge of all kinds. But also I focus a lot of attention on the environment and people to make sure that I will not have too many demands on me. And this is how fives work. We crave for privacy and to be independent and self-sufficient and to have control over our own agendas. And it's hard for fives when other people interfere, interrupt too much. So on one hand, fives get really focused on going deeper on things. They become very knowledgeable, but this is all a consequence of detaching. And detaching not only from other people, as I was saying, but detaching from their own feelings and sometimes from all of life that's happening around them. And challenges for fives then are staying connected and speaking their truth right away, not by the end of the meeting. Because, by the way, at times fives in a meeting do like this. Oh my God, these people have no idea what they are talking about, and it will be too much for me to even start explaining. And I'm just counting the minutes for that to finish, and I'll just go do my way the other time, and I won't bother explaining that. So there is a whole arrogance that comes with all this positioning in life, but it's also because fives have detached. And it's super important for fives to develop emotionally and physically so that they are not just a head, a walking head, just thinking and planning and analyzing everything.
Type 6, the second of the head types. 6 is what we call the core fear point. Each of the three triads of types is associated with a core emotion. Fear for the head types, anger for the body types, sadness for the heart types. And sixes are motivated by fear in a central way. And the interesting thing is a lot of sixes, before they learn the Enneagram, they don't consciously experience themselves as fearful, or they don't call it fear. They might say something like, I'm just really good at being prepared. I'm really good problem solver. I like to poke holes in things, But there is this sense that sixes have of kind of scanning the horizon for threats and risks and dangers, because there's this need for safety and certainty, but kind of difficulty actually finding it. So their focus of attention is very much on what could go wrong and anticipating what might go wrong before it happens. So they tend to think in terms of worst case scenarios. They also can be very doubting and skeptical. It can be hard for them to trust others. It can be hard for them to trust surface appearances. They tend to have authority issues because if you're someone who's fear-based, people with power are potentially a source of threat. And so they both want a good authority that can help them feel safe, but they also question authority or test authority or even potentially rebel against authority if that authority proves untrustworthy. Now, sometimes they get perceived as being negative or pessimistic, but most sixes will say, I'm just being realistic. They tend to be natural contrarians. When you say something, they'll automatically say the other side. In fact, one of the names for the six is the devil's advocate. So they tend to be naturally humble and self-deprecating. They can be very funny, very responsible, really bring a lot of attentiveness to bear on making sure things go well. But the challenge is learning to trust, have more faith in themselves, also have more faith in others.
So sevens have very particular focus of attention. It goes to multiple options. I don't want to have only one course of action here, only one project, only one idea. I need to have several because I want to jump from one to another when I'm getting bored. Another thing is focusing on what's positive as a way to avoid whatever is negative. So we can say that seven's focus of attention goes anywhere away from pain and suffering. It's like avoiding those by all means, right? And sometimes it's all about satisfying more immediate needs for pleasure. And it's a little bit hard for sevens to go on when pleasure stops. So for some sevens, not all, it's hard to complete projects, complete stuff. For other sevens, in order to do so, it takes rationalization, like bringing a colorful frame to a black and white picture and just doing things differently so that they don't get bored. Another thing is it's hard for sevens to stay, period. It's just stay, just be with what there is. Like in career management, for instance, we always see sevens wanting to do lateral moves, to know something else different, instead of sticking a bit more with where they are and eventually go up vertically. But it's like the priority becomes, I want to have that other experience that I haven't had yet. So there is, of course, lots of strengths behind all of that: versatility, creativity, positivity. And many people simply miss sevens when they are not present in the team. It gets light and nice, but there is a cost for them. And they might rationalize, why would I leave differently than this, right? What is the benefit? But it's simply, I will not get more mature if I don't have this human experience of facing the pain that is there to be dealt with, instead of just making as if that doesn't happen.
So those are the 3 head types. 5s are known as quiet specialists, 6s are known as loyal skeptics, and 7s are the enthusiastic visionaries. Now that we know all of the types, Bea and I will continue the conversation after the break so she can answer all the questions you probably have about the Enneagram. I even squeezed some in for you skeptics, so stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few moments. And we're back with Bea Chestnut. I want to hear more about how you found the Enneagram and what got you interested, however many years ago you started.
Sure. So I learned the Enneagram kind of by accident from a friend's father. So I grew up in Palo Alto in California in the US. And a good friend of mine, his father was a psychiatrist based at Stanford, and he was one of the first Enneagram teachers to kind of create a school way back in like 1988, 89. And in 1990, my friend actually died. We were 25. And it still makes me choke up when I think about that. So in the wake of his death, his parents would invite us all over to dinner. And when we were planning the memorial, they included us. So I got close to his father and his parents at that point. And during, that time, Dr. Daniels, as I call him, he was talking about the Enneagram all the time. And he was saying, I'm a psychiatrist based at Stanford. It's a little weird. I'd be into this thing called the Enneagram. Yeah. And he said, but I see it as my calling. And he said, the Enneagram was by far the most powerful personal growth method that he'd seen in his whole career. And this is someone who's, in the senior part of his career as a psychotherapist and a psychiatrist based in kind of a mainstream university setting. And here he is saying the Enneagram is by far the most powerful tool he's seen. So that made me really sit up and listen. And right away, when I read about the type 2, because Dr. Daniels said, I think you're a 2, I read the chapter and it just blew my mind. It was like, whoa. It was almost like, I almost describe it as a religious experience. Like before that, there wasn't as much proof that there was a God or that there, but after, it was almost like after I read that, like this sense came in of like, wow, there is something, there is a larger pattern out there. There is this system that at first glance, I probably wouldn't have looked much into because it just felt like, well, a lot of these personality typologies, they tell you a little bit, but how much can they really tell you? Not that much. In my undergraduate university career, I took one psychology class because to me it was kind of boring. They were giving jargony names to things that I thought were sort of obvious. But when I learned the Enneagram and I read about my type, it was like, whoa, like how does this thing know all about me? Because it put into words things that I knew to be true about myself. But before I saw those words, I didn't fully understand what that was, Like I remember I'm a type 2, and I remember there was a phrase, something along the lines of, 2s have an exquisite radar for the detection of moods and preferences in others. And I was like, whoa, like I knew it was true and that I did that, but I would never put it into those words. But putting it into those words helped me understand myself at a deeper level so efficiently in a way that I never would have thought possible. So yeah, I learned it from Dr. Daniels and got really immersed to the point where I shifted my career path because of the Enneagram. And I went back to school to become a psychotherapist because of the Enneagram, because it so quickly became just part of the way I think that I knew I had to do something in life that was centered around it.
Wow. That's a really powerful story. And how wild that you found this like incredibly deep sense of meaning in something that was so difficult, like the loss of a friend and then being connected to his father and having that be the reason.
Yeah, exactly. It was a really strange but amazing time.
Yeah. So tell me what the Enneagram is, because I often find that people lump it in with like the Myers-Briggs and, DISC and all these other assessment tools.
So there's a couple of different answers to that question. I would say the way it's used currently, it's as a framework for a personality typology system that has 9 different types. And I like to highlight that those 9 types are grouped into 3 groups of 3 that correspond as a personality typology to the idea that we humans have 3 centers of intelligence. And I like that level of it right there, because on that level, there's a lot to be learned. But one of the reasons why it's a unique personality typology, and one that I think is uniquely powerful and accurate in helping us understand ourselves and expand our level of awareness, is because the symbol that it's based on comes from ancient wisdom teaching. Now, you can use the Enneagram and never know about that or be interested in that or learn about that. It still works, you don't have to. But for me, when I learned that, it helped me see, like, why is this one so different? Because of course it has things that are in common with things like Myers-Briggs or DISC. But I think it's uniquely powerful, partly because it's a growth model. Like, it's a symbol of transformation. It's a symbol of how we go from one level of consciousness to a higher level of consciousness, and a symbol of perpetual motion and change in many different dynamic living systems, right? We're just applying it here to the human personality.
Tell me, though, I think sometimes the word consciousness can get lost in this, like, otherworldly, this is woo-woo, it's for a specific set of people. How would you, like, really describe that to ground people in what it means to be more conscious?
Right. I mean, I think in the business setting, it overlaps a lot with what we sometimes describe as emotional intelligence. I think that the capacity and the will to be aware, more and more aware of yourself and the world around you in a way that is not habitual. We don't fall into being more aware. We have to make efforts. And so it's like a commitment to doing the best we can every day to be more awake and aware to what's happening in us and around us, and to notice what gets in the way of that and to work on that, with effort and sort of through an act of will. Like, we need to try to be more awake and aware, because if we get passive in our lives, and this is just even in everyday life, the Enneagram tells us that's a recipe for just doing the same thing over and over again and not going beyond our comfort zone. And so it's a call to kind of operate at a higher level of awareness in what we're doing, of asking questions like, okay, am I really present in the moment now to receive some communication or information that I might need? Or am I just kind of doing the things that I've always done and not really expanding the level of my awareness?
Yeah, so I remember when I first learned the Enneagram and I got my type 7 back, I was so excited. And I was like, I was so ready to read it. I wanted that report so bad. I like ate it up, and it felt so resonant, and I laughed and I was embarrassed and like all of those things. And then for a while, I just sat in the, well, I'm a 7, so place. So I could sort of justify my behaviors or my motivators really, and like why I was doing what I was doing to other people because of this thing.
Yeah.
And then of course I went around and tried to type everyone in my life. This was before getting certified. So, I went through that process. But then I remember hearing someone say, the Enneagram is not about over-identifying with your type. It's about understanding the box you've put yourself in and how to get out of that box.
Yes, exactly. I think, starting in childhood, we develop a personality to navigate in the social world, to be functional. And what we often don't see is that our personality patterns become limiting because to the extent that we are kind of at one with or completely identified with our personality, in other words, we think that's what we are, we get stuck in the patterns of the past that are designed for survival, but not really designed for thriving or for reaching our higher potential. So the Enneagram makes it easier for us to access an understanding of ourselves so that we can make change if we want to. We can go from being totally focused within and identified with our personality to using the personality as a vehicle for moving beyond it.
So when you say people over-identify with their personality, like I can remember a time in my 20s, this was before I started meditating and really getting into this work, where I went, well, what do you mean? Like, I am me. You know,
Yes.
like it's like I remember the first time someone said to me, you have a voice in your head. And then I went down that rabbit hole of recognizing like, oh, there is a voice in my head that is talking all the time that isn't me. So when you talk about the personality, how do you get people to understand there's them and then there's a personality?
Yeah. So in psychology, we talk about how there's a true self and a false self, right? That might be one way of looking at it. And that we are who we are in a very deep way. Like we're each born into this human life, and we're not a blank slate. Now, when we're born and we're young, we can't just be that because we have to get along in a world where our needs aren't met, where we have, other humans who also are operating at a lower level of awareness. So one way of looking at this is we're born into a fairly unconscious world. Again, that's just the human condition. And so we basically develop a personality that is to some degree reflective of who we are, right? Because it's based on who we come in as. But it's sort of like it gets to be formed more from our coping strategies than who we really are, right? If you had a depressed parent, for instance, that's going to impact you as a child. And in order to adapt and survive, given that you depend on that person, and humans have the longest period of dependency of any mammal, you're going to need to adapt in some ways to survive, given that you may not get all your needs met. Right. Some people had a lot of trauma in their background. Some people have less. But even people who had relatively good parents, easy, privileged lives, even those people have personalities and can have wounds and trauma. Sometimes it's even harder to heal because it's like, well, I shouldn't have anything wrong with me because I had a roof over my head and I had all of these privileges. Well, you can still be depressed or anxious or unhappy, and you can still suffer from some of these defensive self-strategies that had to be really strong in the light of reacting to things that were hard. And the harder the circumstances were that we survived, the more rigid those defenses will be, the harder to change, and the more we may be stuck in the residue and the consequences of that personality type in a way that doesn't allow us to really be fulfilled, to reach our full potential.
What do you do when you meet with someone, whether in business or personally, and they want to take the Enneagram because they're interested in growing? Like, what's your kind of like go-to, okay, here's your assessment, here are the results. What do they do once they know what's going on with them and they know that they want to grow?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So, of course, first is finding the right type, which is tricky, as you've already talked about. But once people find their type, the main method behind the Enneagram, especially in the beginning, but all the way through, is what we call self-observation, which is kind of developing an inner witness that is a part of you, but is a little bit outside you, kind of looking at what you're doing and narrating it and noticing without judging. Right? This is very important. And it's really hard for people to do this at first First of all, it's hard to do because it's just like meditation can be hard to do. It's hard to focus your attention as an act of will on observing yourself. But another reason why is we can tend to get self-critical when we start noticing things. And that actually stops the process of being able to really self-observe in an objective way, because very quickly we get into, I don't want to see that. Like, it's funny with sevens, when I first would start, say, like do a first coaching session after they learn their type, they would often say, I relate to everything. I relate to, being positive and optimistic and, being future oriented and thinking outside the box. But there's one thing that was on the list that I don't do. I'm not running away from pain. I'm not looking at what's positive to go away from pain. And I think to myself, how interesting. That's the main blind spot of type 7, and often it's wonderful to see people really, on the one hand, start seeing, I do that all the time, to start recognizing the conscious patterns. Because again, part of this self-observation, can you catch yourself in the act of doing something you always do? And in catching yourself in the act, make it more conscious such that it's not going to be just a default mode that you do without having any consciousness. Because what we're really doing with the Enneagram work, which is what we do in good psychotherapy, I think, too, is making unconscious patterns more conscious. That's the name of the game, right? Some 6s will say, wow, before I learned the Enneagram, I didn't really know I was motivated by fear, and starting to realize, wow, I just did something that was really because I was afraid, which I would have thought I was just trying to be prepared before, and a lot of the types will say this. So some types' attention goes out to other people. Some types' primary attention is on the inside. And that can be a subtle distinction, because we all pay attention to what's going on inside of us to some degree. But when I realized, I would be in a group of people and my attention is all out there on what's going on with them. I get into a relationship and all I think about is, does that person like me? And I don't even stop to ask if I like them. Like whereas that's not going to happen to a 7, that's just a 2 thing, So if you can start to really observe, am I seeing these patterns? And are these patterns more like me than these other patterns? Things like that.
I mean, what you just described is something that I think a lot of us experience, right? So like people-pleasing people, I think that spans beyond type. Often it's gender. There's all sorts of ways it shows up. And or, making decisions out of a place of fear, like people who struggle with anxiety, like that's something that I think people might experience at all types. My own experience was going, oh my gosh, I do really feel a lot of envy. And so maybe I am a 4. It's like, how do we distinguish between what's going on outside of us because of how we've been conditioned or the society we're in versus our number?
Right. I think boiling it down in some practical terms, like in order to be a 4, these are the things that you're going to tend to do most of the time.
Got it.
Right. And if you're not doing those, then you're probably not a 4. Like 4s, for instance, are always comparing with other people. It's a comparing mind. And that's going a lot of the time, so you walk into a room, oh, wow, that person's dressed better than I am. Oh, well, that person, looks like they're smarter than I am. Oh, that person is this more than I am. Oh, I'm better than that person on this, That's just that's the mindset, and that's not what 7s are mainly paying attention to, So another thing is percentage of the time, right? Like if you're someone who maybe compares yourself sometimes or in certain circumstances, yeah. And of course, you need to take gender and culture into account. Like my business partner is a 5, as you know, he comes from Brazil. Brazil's a 7 country. And so he doesn't look like a 5 that comes from, let's say, Europe, like the Netherlands or some of the Scandinavian countries. Those are very 5-ish countries, right? So there's a way that as a 5, he looks more outgoing, because he's had to be because of his culture.
Okay, so I'm gonna use myself as a guinea pig here, and also because I'm curious. As you said that, I went, oh God, that was the first thing that I was like, I don't I don't like the feeling of being potentially trapped in something negative. And I'm definitely much more aware of it now. It's been a few years, but I still do it. It's still a pattern that's like very obvious. And so I wonder between the 7 and the 4, I'm like, ooh, maybe I'm really not a 4 because I go see a lot of Broadway. And many times I'm going to musicals and they're fun and they're light. And then other times, I'll go to plays or musicals that aren't. And so I had recently gone to one that I left with the person I was with who's a 3. And we were talking about how we felt about it. And I was like, I just didn't like the ending. It didn't end well. I didn't like that it didn't end happily. And the person was like, well, that's life. Like it doesn't always end perfectly. And I was like, I don't want to think about that. Like I didn't like it. I felt this like really nasty pang of like, I don't want to deal with that. And therefore, I'm not going to be someone who recommends this play, which was fantastic, by the way.
Yeah. I think that's a great thing that you're noticing in yourself and a great example of something that it would be more 7-ish. Like the mind comes in and says, oh, that's not a good experience. That wasn't a good ending. I'm not recommending this play. But emotionally, it's like what 7s do is there's just a way not without really deciding to, more unconscious. It's like if something feels bad, I avoid it. I want something that makes me feel good. I don't want to be around something that makes me feel bad. And bad can include boring, anxiety producing, as well as painful or sad or things like that. And I do think the 4 is the opposite of that. 4s don't push away pain. Now, it may not feel good to a 4 either, but they would much more be the person who says, well, that's the way life goes, or sometimes things end like that, or it felt authentic to me. It felt true to life, and that was valuable to me, or I could see a beauty in the painful ending. It sort of all made sense. There was a poetry to it. That's maybe more the 4 response. Yeah, because 4s live more in their feelings. In fact, the 4 challenge for many type 4s is to stop over-identifying with feelings and suffering. So that's one of the few ways that 7s and 4s are actually quite opposite, although they can be lookalikes for various reasons.
How do you deal with people who are skeptical? I mean, I think of when I gave this test to a 6 and they were like, I had that experience of a long period of time of them kind of coming around, and I don't think they ever really did. But I'm curious, despite the type and the number, how do you deal with people who are like, what is this thing and why should I believe it?
Right. Well, first of all, I don't push back on skepticism. I don't get into a power struggle. I don't try to convince the person. I am open to skepticism, and I don't blame them, right? This is a little weird. I mean, it is kind of surprising. I mean, so first of all, I'm open to it. I welcome it. I ask, what questions do you have? What are you thinking? What do you see it? So I invite it. Another thing is I stay really confident in myself in terms of my total understanding and belief in this system, and it brings value. Now, some people are going to be skeptical no matter what you say. So if it's someone who's just not open, and their skepticism means they're really not open to this, they don't want to understand it, then I really let them go, And I'll say something like, you know what, the Enneagram's not for everyone. And I don't think it's for everyone, because I do believe you have to have a certain level of consciousness to get it. And I think the person who's skeptical but open, then it's just about what questions do you have and how can I provide you with more information? And you can see if that shifts your perspective or not. And one of the reasons I think why people get skeptical is the Enneagram, especially in a business setting, it introduces a vulnerability factor that people may not be choosing. And I think people need to be able to say no to being vulnerable, especially in a work setting, before they can say yes. I think if they're given the chance to say no, then they feel safe enough to say yes later. So I think sometimes that skepticism is, I don't know how this is going to be used. I don't know what's going to be asked of me. I don't know if I'm going to feel exposed or if this is going to be used against me. And so I try to just be open and see if that shifts. And if not, that's okay.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to have you answer my 3 statements, and I'll have you do it again next time, but I'll catch you on this one first. The first question is, I should say, the first statement to complete is, better humans are.
Open-minded and Humble.
Better work is.
Joyful.
And a better world has.
I think just more love and kindness and respect.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing this. I can't wait to talk to you a second time.
Thank you for doing what you're doing, and thank you for this incredible conversation.
That was Enneagram teachers Bea Chestnut and Aranyo Pais. They co-wrote the book, The Enneagram Guide to Waking Up, Find Your Path, Face Your Shadow, and Discover Your True Self. Next week, we'll be back with Bea talking about how to bring the Enneagram into your work. It's going to be good, so stay with us. If this conversation resonated with you, share it with the first person who comes to mind. You never know how it could help them out. And support other people like you in finding our show by leaving us a rating before you go. While you're at it, write a one-sentence review telling me and the team what you love about Everyday Better. And as always, you can get me in your inbox by signing up for our weekly personal development newsletter, giving you practical tips on how to level up with small steps every day. Find it in our show notes for this episode or at linkedin.com/everydaybetter. That's linkedin.com/everydaybetter. Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Grace Rubin and Emily Reeves. Asaf Gadrone is our sound engineer. He makes sure we sound good in the studio. Joe DeGiorgi mixed our show. Enrique Montalvo is the executive producer of LinkedIn Editorial Productions. Dave Pond is head of news production. Courtney Coop is head of LinkedIn Original Audio and Video. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. And I'm Leah Smart. Thanks for coming with me, and I'll see you next week.